Hello friends, in this series that is devoted to the short story in Europe, we today touch upon an important American author, Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is known basically for Scarlet Letter, the famous novel that he wrote, and is a novelist in general. But then he also has written short stories like most other writers who wrote long fiction, and the short fiction is a mode of expression that sometimes makes their intervention maybe yet more effective than in the longer fiction, the novel. And the second thing that comes to mind in the context is that Hawthorne belonged to the 19th century, and he has those characteristics of writing that were popular at that time, and that became very effective means of what can be called intervention. And there are many other things, and we have today for this particular subject on Hawthorne short stories, Dr. Richa Bajaj, who teaches English in Hindu College, Delhi University, and she'll be telling us about the characteristics that the fiction of Hawthorne contains, and at the same time she will also enlighten us about the atmosphere in which the kind of short stories that he wrote became famous and crystallized. So over to Dr. Richa Bajaj, please make a point, and then we can discuss.
Yes, thank you, Professor Prakash. In my discussion today on the short fiction of Nathaniel Hawthorne, I plan to take up these two stories which were written around 1843 and 44. And so this is a very, in a way, 19th century America in itself is going through a period of turmoil, and there are new kinds of literature that are coming to the fore. Also because it is carrying on with the spirit of the the independence movement of the 18th century, and by the time you reach the 19th century already there are 2-3 aspects which become important. One, of course, is America's past, that is of Puritanism, of how how an entire population came to build a kind of a Puritan society. And in fact, Hawthorne's great grandfather was a judge, and he would impose these stern Puritan laws on the people. So I think Hawthorne is also trying, when he goes to such topics, then he's also trying to grapple with a past that he's uncomfortable with. So there is a very strong anti-Puritan strain in him, and how it turns people, how it is of course anti-humanism as well then. So I think that's one of the very one strain that he's taken, and American writers in general had to grapple with in the 19th century when they were thinking of independence, and when they were thinking of the free will of the individual or the capabilities of the individual. Then they had to look at this critically at their own Puritan past, and I think build an alternate vision of humanity through a new kind of a Christian ethic. So I think this is one of the things that that you find 19th century writers grappling with. The other was, of course, industrialization as it was unfolding in America at a unprecedented sort of range and scope. So writers were also dealing with the question of increased mechanization of life, which again stood against the principles of humanity or humanism. Again, and then it becomes more complicated, I would say, because at the turn of the century, when they won their independence, and by the time we enter the 19th century, writers are already looking forward optimistically at an era which would bring about a kind of transformation of American life along lines of progress and optimism. But this optimism is not carried forward, and this optimism very soon turns into a sort of a dystopia for many writers, because they realize that science and technology and progress and modernization, industrialization, is not taking them to their aimed world or their imagined world. So their vision is not materialized in the course of industrialization, and I think that, and when they had promised themselves with the Declaration of Independence that they would be free thinking, capable, voiced sort of a kind of a nation. So I think that is another issue that writers in the 19th century had to grapple with. So, there was this religious angle, and then there was the angle of industrialization and how writers looked at their own selves. As I have also mentioned, that this is also the period of self-realization and self-fashioning, because now they have severed their ties from England, and now they have to rebuild their own nation along lines of progress. And I think this is at the center. This becomes the 19th century sort of problematic that writers try to deal with, and try to come to terms with. So Hawthorne, you find, Hawthorne is born in 1804 in Salem, and to a family of Puritans, as I said. But he was never very he was very interested in his past, but he never could adhere to that kind of rigid Puritanism that his neighborhood, his culture stood for. And we see a sharp attack of it in obviously his famous novel, The Scarlet Letter. So that, I think, has its roots there. But Hawthorne also had very strong New England roots, and in the middle of this 19th century, you saw that New England saw such liberated writers emerging on the scene, such as Melville and Emily Dickinson, Emerson, Thoreau. All these writers were part of that New England group that was coming up in the northeast of America, which was known for its academic, intellectual sort of growth. So I think this is an important point in Hawthorne's life also, because the culture and the milieu and the writers around him were all challenging rigid forms of life, and he also took inspiration from this particular group and continued to write. So the nation as such in this period was also developing along democratic lines, democratic values, independent in spirit, or a sense of self-reliance. These were the new topics that were being discussed in literatures of the time, and I think Hawthorne picks them up very well and uses them very well in his short fiction. And this actually brings in a sort of a new strain of thought in American literature at the time. So I think in order to understand, this is the sort of intellectual background to Hawthorne's career, and some of the themes that he talks about include, this kind of the role of art in the age of mechanical life or mechanical living. Along with that, scientific progress and the obsession with science, which also turns into a sort of a dystopia, as we'll see in one of the stories here. Anti-Puritan thought, again, non-conformity also led to dissociation of people from communities. So the idea of non-conformity is, I think, also looked at very differently from the point of view of humanism, that it is finally, and when I say humanism, I'm also referring to the human-centric values or human-centric emotions. For instance, prioritizing love over any other custom or tradition, prioritizing a sense of duty or a sense of loyalty over rigid social forms. So when one speaks of humanism, then one has these points in these points in mind. Of course, what is also available in Hawthorne's fiction is his power of description. I think he is able to capture in detail the essence of a character, but also to bring about a sort of a kind of a dialectical reality, or a kind of a reality which is going in multiple directions, and you don't pretty much understand. They're not they're not very strict, rigid characters. Characters are sensitive. Characters stand for an idea, for a concept. So I think he's able to also use his power of description to be able to give a sense of breadth of character. There is a romantic strain also in Hawthorne, and I think that's probably the kind of influence that he has of Emerson and others. And this romanticism has its roots in, I'd say, a reality that leaves little scope for individual expression. And so whenever individual expression is required, he turns to a kind of a romantic idea of things. So these are some of the issues that we touch upon as we go along discussing the short fiction of Hawthorne. Yeah, how would you look at this?
I think it's a very good way to use an argument in order to understand what you call problematic of writing in the 19th century, America particularly. And at the back, as you rightly say, is the sense of independence that started from the American War of Independence in the late 18th century, and from that this generation of Hawthorne and others that came. But they had new challenges, and
Right.
these challenges had not been anticipated earlier. That freedom will put them into the hands of Puritanism.
Right.
And as you were explaining, I was thinking about the role of Puritanism in England, back home, where it became a vehicle of revolution. Cromwell, is a Puritan, and at that point of time in England, all the drama activities and entertainments have been stopped. That's what Puritans were doing, and yet the larger masses from the countryside, they came and participated in the social change. Now that is England, but so far as America is concerned, after independence, people realized that science is not taking them anywhere, and that humanism is at the receiving end. And this is what is the concern of these writers, the great writers in the 19th century. So the same problematic that occurs here was a kind of generation of the correct creative forces in England. How do you respond to that?
No, I think, you see, America was founded on the logic of this kind of a group who believed in the Puritan ethic. And with 1775 or so, when the Declaration of Independence is announced, and they go to war with England. Post that, I think there is a sense of independence that is now instilled or in this new generation, or such as Hawthorne. By 1804, when Hawthorne is born, then he is already a product of this new age that is thinking along lines of individual expression and self-fulfillment or freedom of the individual. So in such a time, how do you talk about non-conformity, and how do you sanction non-conformity? Why is it that this Puritan ethic does not give any sort of independence or freedom to the individual? So they cannot anymore adhere to the older logic in America. They have to change their way of thought, and in changing their way of thought, then they begin to question everything else. And it is also one of the reasons why I'd say Hawthorne is also very, he's a precursor in many ways to feminist thought, because most of the times he's talking about women. You think of the Scarlet Letter, you find that Hester Prynne is somebody who's been ostracized by the community, but she continues to live with her children, and even when she's humiliated and she's supposed to wear the badge A to suggest that she's the culprit, and she's to wear it as a token of her guilt, it's not that she is actually guilty. She loved, and then she continues to play that part of being a dutiful mother. So in a way, he's also looking at women who actually are the worst affected in the system of Puritan ethic and Puritan logic. That is one thing. The second is, where is science taking them? While science is bringing in a lot of technology, if you see, even Walt Whitman and others are, they're very optimistic about the role of science, about railways, about railways that are connecting now the length and breadth of the country. But in Hawthorne, when you see this kind of science being played out, you see a kind of a dystopic world where the obsession, for scientific developments, cost human life. So in that sense, I think he is able to problematize the prevailing ethos. He is able to problematize the mainstream sort of logic that we have around things. I think that's what makes it also very interesting, that his short fiction really is focused on an event, but that event opens so many directions and so many idea-oriented dimensions.
Another thing that you pointed out, and that is of great interest for me, and would be for the viewers also, is that these writers, and particularly the author, they are taking to description of things, and the kind of information that they require in order to understand their world, and that description is seeping into the prose of American writing at that time, and that American writing in the 19th century is becoming more and more, unpoetic and more prose-centered. So this I think explains very well. And what about romanticism? What kind of romanticism do you see in the? And it's a positive point that you say, because romantics in England also were carriers of change, and here they are critiquing the society with the help of romanticism.
So, this story that the artist of the beautiful, that I'd also be taking up, permitting time, talks about this character who is unable to fit in the mechanical age. He's unable to work along lines of main on strength, on reality, on materialism. While so the artist of the beautiful is basically this young man who is Owen, and he who tries to live a life which is different from everybody else. While everyone else is talking about materialism, and he's an apprentice, but his master says that, well, I prefer an ironsmith over a goldsmith, because an ironsmith has his life is full of labor, there is some use to it. So there is an entire utilitarian philosophy that is in the background. So how this character is trying to lead a life of an artist in an age that does not appreciate the role of the artist. So there is I'm reminded of Thomas Carlyle's essay, and in his work Signs of the Time, he talks about the mechanical age. And in this essay, Thomas Carlyle talks about how 19th century cannot be defined as a moral, heroic, or any other age. Rather, the best nomenclature would be the mechanical age. So the mechanical age refers to this sense of machine life, where human beings turn into machines, and everything is understood, or is valued on the basis of its utility in life. So in a way he talks about this. So this story is about this man who's trying to use science. He's trying to use a kind of a mobility. He's using mobility science in order to create an artificial butterfly, for instance. But he is drawn to the movements in nature. He says, he's drawn towards the movements of butterfly and the movements of small animals. So he sees beauty there. And while everybody else is involved in tasks which have some utility in society and are in that sense material. So he is often looked down upon because he is playing no role in 19th century. And this is where I think the poetic romantic dimension comes in, that this man continues to live in his romantic world, so much so that he actually leaves his neighborhood where people look down upon his work and goes in the lap of nature. He starts living in natural surroundings and continues his research and invention there. So we are told that this man had a knack for a kind of a delicate ingenuity. So his creativeness was that of the delicate kinds, which believed in imagination and tried to bring machine to imagination also. He said that he would not want to be associated in making any cotton machine or a windmill or a water mill, because that's not what he sees himself in. He sees himself in a kind of a beautiful creative artwork, and that creative artwork, which is actually also a product of science, because he's able to create an automaton, which is a kind of a, you could call it a robotic sort of a butterfly, that this butterfly is artificial, but he creates that. And it's a tragedy, because towards the end of it, this little infant, he's in love with Annie, this girl, but Annie's father doesn't want, obviously wants Annie to marry someone who's the man of the world, a man of strength, a man of materialism. So a man who believes in the concept of utility, and not be associated with a romantic artist who is peculiar and is engaged in delicate craftsmanship, etc. He's obviously, again, like Hester Prynne, he's also ostracized by the community. So he prefers to live outside society, outside community, and continue his work. When Annie is married to this another person, Robert, who's very much the man of the world, and a mainstream man who believes in materialism and other things and utilitarian philosophy. You have Owen, who visits them and gives Annie and her child, this artificial butterfly that has been his work for so many months. And when he gives this artificial butterfly to this child, the child actually squashes it. So he sees the death of his own artwork in the hands of this child, because he says this child also carries this kind of the look of the grandfather and the father, which is people of strength and reality, who are focused on utilitarian philosophy. So he sees in this child in the making also the father and the grandfather who is not able to appreciate and who wants to conquer or capture and squash whatever is beautiful. So towards the end it is tragic in the sense that his butterfly lands in the hands of a child who also squashes it, and then he finds that, you know, he feels bad, tremendously bad about it, but then he closes the discussion by suggesting that, you know, I have already achieved you know, the beautiful by creating this art piece, you know, and if it is now it has died in the hands of society, then that has nothing to do with me. So I think there is a lot of, again, a sense of philosophical romantic take here, that the artist has achieved fulfillment in the process of making something, creating something beautiful. The future or the fate of the artwork is not in his hands. It can die in the hands of society, but that has very little to do with him.
Suppose I say that, you know, there is a different kind of American romanticism. It is different from the English romanticism.
Right.
Here the romanticism is being pursued by the authors to understand the reality and reflect on it, rather than, you know, escaping it. There is no escape from the social life in American fiction that might be there in the case of other countries. And here they are looking at the reality from the romantic angle to adjust to it in such a manner that they can critique it directly.
You know what, I think in you can say that, but I think the English romantics were also very much a product of neoclassical literatures. You know, they were all very well read in the pre-tradition, and if they were rebelling against it, it was in a way to choose a different life. But I think in America it is a crushing, you know, the repression is real repression of religion, of you know, anybody who is different has no space in society. You know, it's like a juggernaut that you need to be a part of. If you're not a part of, then you'll be crushed under its weight. So I think that is something which is very defining in American romanticism, that you know, and that's one of the things. The other thing is that this romanticism is not an escape from reality, because it is about the preservation of selfhood, or you could say the independence or the free will of the individual. The individual is trying to preserve this sense of freedom to express and the freedom of will by keeping oneself away from society. So in a way, I think that, again, if you notice that Avan, when he goes to live in nature, because nobody appreciates his work in the town, then when he sits in the lap of nature, he's not talking about philosophy, he's actually working on his art piece. And this art piece is not it's like a poet and a painter's, but then this art piece that he's created, he's also created a machine at the end of the day. But this machine is a delicate machine. It is not a windmill or a cotton machine or something that is going to add to industrialization, but a different kind of machine. In fact, you know, if you think about it, in the 20th century, Walter Benjamin came up with the essay Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. So in a way, I think in the 19th century, there is a sense in Hawthorne that this is what the meaning of art, and the fate of art is bleak in the 19th century, and that there is very little scope to be able to pursue the artist's work in the 19th century, because that is not at the center of America's vision about itself, especially when it is looking towards a kind of a formidable future that it wants to build for itself.
I think the kind of engagement that the American romanticism has with life is important, in the sense that it shapes a different kind of creative writing than the short story or the novel. And there, you know, they give a lot of importance to ideas, and then those ideas are you know, transformed into a kind of palpable reality by them.
Right. Yes. And so you also find that this reality is brought to us through a kind of an imaginative way, right? Through literature, through short fiction. Again, talking about short fiction, you know, he just picks up an event and the characters represent ideas there. And each character, you know, for instance, Avan represents this kind of an artistry. So Peter, his master, represented utilitarian philosophy, and the daughter is confused between the two. So in a way, the characters stand for opinions, and which is why I think at one level this is a normal story. It's a simple story, and that may have no meaning in itself. At another, it is a very intellectual story as well.
So friends, with this introduction to the writing of short stories in America in the 19th century, we come to the end of the first part of the discussion, which is about the background, which is about the ethos that America had and that had a role to play in the shaping of the short story, which will be discussed in the following discussion. Thank you.